The wind did not just blow across the northern plains, it scoured them. It was a late-season gale, carrying the bitter promise of winter and grit that tasted of pulverized stone. To the man stumbling through the stand of cottonwoods, the wind felt like a personal enemy, a physical weight trying to shove him into the freezing mud of the riverbank. His name was Elias Thorne, though he had not spoken it aloud in weeks. Elias gripped his side, his fingers stiff and clumsy inside his leather glove. The blood had soaked through his coat hours ago, warm and sticky at first, now cold and stiffening against his ribs. The bullet had caught him just below the rib cage, a parting gift from a dispute over a card table in a muddy settlement 3 days' ride south. Or perhaps it was from the posse that had mistaken him for a horse thief near the territory line. His memory was fracturing, peeling away like old paint under the heat of the fever burning behind his eyes. He had lost his horse miles back. The roan had stepped into a gopher hole and snapped a leg, forcing Elias to do the only merciful thing left. Since then, he had walked. He had walked until the horizon began to tilt and sway. The river was a gray scar cutting through the dying grass. Elias aimed for the water, thinking of drinking, but his knees betrayed him. He pitched forward, catching himself on a rotting log before sliding down into the dirt. The impact jarred his wound, sending a spike of white-hot agony up his spine that nearly made him vomit. He lay there, cheek pressed against the frozen earth, breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. The smell of decay, wet leaves and stagnant water filled his nose. Above him, the sky was a bruising purple, the sun sinking rapidly behind the jagged line of the distant hills. He forced his eyes open one last time. On the ridge above the river, silhouetted against the dying light, sat a row of shapes. They were motionless, carved from the same darkness that was creeping over the land. Riders. He counted 3, maybe 4. They were not wearing the slouch hats of the cavalry or the wide brims of cattlemen. They sat their horses with a fluid, natural stillness that belonged to this land long before fences scarred it. Elias tried to reach for the navy colt at his hip, but his arm felt like it was filled with lead. The darkness rushed in from the edges of his vision, narrowing the world down to a single pinpoint of gray light. They are watching, he thought. And then the darkness took him completely. The heat was the first thing to return. It was not the fever heat that had roasted him from the inside out, but a dry, smoky warmth that smelled of sage, burning pine, and cured leather. Elias drifted in the space between sleep and waking. The pain in his side had dulled to a heavy, throbbing ache, rhythmically pounding in time with his heartbeat. He felt something soft beneath him, furs, deep and thick. He was not on the riverbank anymore. He opened his eyes. Above him, lodge poles converged toward a smoke hole where a patch of gray sky was visible. The light inside was dim, filtered through the thick hide walls of the lodge. A fire burned low in the center pit, casting dancing shadows against the painted liners. He tried to shift his weight and hissed through his teeth as the wound protested. "Stay still." The voice was soft, but it carried an edge of command that cut through the haze. Elias froze. He turned his head slowly, fighting the stiffness in his neck. He was not alone in the bedding. Lying next to him, close enough that he could feel the radiant heat of her body through the buffalo robes, was a young woman. She was propped up on one elbow, watching him with eyes that were dark, intelligent, and entirely unamused. Her hair was 2 thick braids that fell over her shoulders, dark as a raven's wing against the pale deerskin of her dress. Elias blinked, his mind struggling to catch up. He looked down. He was under the same heavy robe as she was. His coat and boots were gone. He was stripped to his trousers and undershirt, bandages wrapped tightly around his midsection. He scrambled backward, the instinct to retreat overriding the pain, but there was nowhere to go. The lodge wall was at his back. "Easy," the woman said. Her English was clipped, precise, the vowels flattened in the way of someone who had learned the language from a strict teacher. "If you tear those stitches, I will not sew them again." "Who are you?" Elias rasped. His throat felt like he had swallowed a handful of sand. "Where am I?" "You're in the lodge of Chief Standing Elk," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I am Winona, and you are the man who decided to die on our riverbank." Elias stared at her. The chief's lodge. And he was in her bed. The implication hit him with the force of a physical blow. He looked at the lodge flap, then back at her. "Why am I here?" he asked, gesturing to the furs covering them both. "Like this?" "Because you were freezing," she said simply. Her face remained impassive, but there was a tightness around her mouth. "And because my father's warriors found you, to them, you are a trespasser, a spy, a threat." Outside the lodge, a murmur of voices began to rise. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder, but quickly grew into a chaotic chorus of shouts and the heavy thud of footsteps. The camp was waking up, or perhaps it had never slept. Winona tensed. She sat up straighter, pulling the robe up to her chin, her gaze darting to the entrance. "Listen to me," she said, leaning in close. Her scent, wood smoke and sweetgrass, filled his head. "The men outside are angry. They have been tracking the soldiers who burned the winter grazing lands to the east. When they found you, half of them wanted to leave you for the wolves. The other half wanted to bring you here to answer for the soldiers." "I am not a soldier," Elias said. "The denial automatic. It does not matter what you say." She cut him off. "It matters what they see. And what they see is a white man in the lodge of the chief's daughter." Elias felt the blood drain from his face. He understood enough of the customs of the plains to know that hospitality was sacred, but boundaries were lethal. "They brought me here?" Elias asked. "I brought you here," she corrected him. "I told them you were known to me. It was the only way to stop Iron Dog from putting a lance through your chest on the riverbank." She looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face, looking for something worth saving. "But now it is morning," she said, her voice grim. "And the morning decides everything. Stay quiet. Do not speak unless I tell you. Do not fight. You cannot win." Before Elias could ask what she meant, the voices outside reached a crescendo. The heavy flap of the lodge was thrown back, letting in a blast of freezing air and the harsh light of dawn. Rough hands grabbed Elias by the arms. He didn't have the strength to resist. He was hauled up from the warmth of the robes, his boots thrown at his feet, and then he was dragged out into the cold. The transition was blinding. Elias stumbled, his bare feet numb on the frost-hardened ground. He blinked against the pale, watery sunlight, trying to find his balance. When his vision cleared, he stopped breathing. They were waiting. In a wide, terrifying half-circle around the entrance of the lodge, men stood with rifles and lances in hand. They were not a disorganized mob. They were a wall, Elias's military mind. A part of him he tried to drown in whiskey, automatically counted them. He scanned the rows, the depth of the formation. There were hundreds. 321 warriors. If the density of the line held true, they stood in absolute silence. 321 pairs of eyes fixed on him, their expressions carved from stone. There was no anger in their faces, which was worse. There was only judgment. They waited as if the entire world had narrowed down to this single patch of dirt and the demand for a reckoning. Elias shivered, the cold biting through his thin shirt. He felt small, a piece of drift looking up at a mountain. Winona stepped out of the lodge behind him. She did not stumble. She walked with her chin high, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders with a regal, deliberate grace. She moved to stand between Elias and the wall of warriors. A man stepped forward from the center of the line. He was older, his hair streaked with gray, wearing a shirt of elk skin decorated with quill work. He carried no weapon, but the way the other men shifted to give him space made it clear who he was. Chief Standing Elk. His face was heavy with the lines of leadership and a grief that looked ancient. He spoke in his own tongue, his voice deep and resonant, carrying easily across the open space. He did not look at Elias. He looked at his daughter. Winona answered him. Her voice was steady, though Elias saw her hands trembling where they clutched the blanket. They spoke back and forth, the cadence sharp and urgent. Elias caught a few words, hand signals he had picked up over the years, but the bulk of it was lost to him. Then, a warrior with a scar running through his left eyebrow stepped out. This was Iron Dog, Elias guessed. The man pointed a finger at Elias, then at the lodge, spitting words that sounded like accusations. He gestured to the south, to the direction of the forts, and then mimed a noose. The chief turned his gaze to Elias for the first time. The weight of it was crushing. The interpreter, a small man with a withered arm standing near the chief, stepped closer to Elias. "Chief Standing Elk says you were found on our land," the interpreter said, his English thick but understandable. "You wear the clothes of the drifting men, but you move like the soldier. You carry a gun that has killed. You are here to spy for the blue coats." "I am no spy," Elias said, his voice cracking. "I am just passing through. I have no quarrel with you." Iron Dog shouted something, stepping closer, his hand gripping the knife at his belt. The interpreter ignored him and continued, "You were found in the sleeping place of the daughter of the chief. You woke beside her." Elias swallowed hard. "I was unconscious. I did not know." "It does not matter what you knew," the interpreter said coldly. "It matters what is in our law. To be found in the robes of a woman is to claim her. It is a binding promise." Elias looked at Winona. She was staring straight ahead, her jaw set. "If it is not a promise," the interpreter went on, "then it is an insult, a theft of honor. And for that, the price is blood." The silence that followed was absolute. Elias felt the sweat freezing on his back. The logic was brutal and inescapable. He had been saved from the cold only to be handed a death sentence. Iron Dog spoke again, his voice a low growl. He was clearly advocating for the execution. The warriors behind him murmured in agreement, the sound like dry leaves scraping together. Winona stepped forward again. She spoke to her father, her voice ringing out clear and sharp. She gestured to Elias, then to herself. She placed a hand over her heart, then extended it toward the council. The chief listened, his expression unreadable. He looked at his daughter, then at the angry warriors, and finally at the gray sky. The interpreter turned back to Elias. "Winona says she claimed you. She says she brought you to her fire not as a prisoner, but as a choice." Elias's head snapped toward her. She refused to look at him. "She says," the interpreter continued, disbelief coloring his tone, "that she intends to honor the placement of the robes. She proposes a union, a wedding." The word hung in the frozen air. Elias stared at the woman standing a few feet away. She was saving his life, he realized. But the cost was insane. "I cannot," Elias whispered, leaning toward her. "You can't do this. Just tell them I'm a fool who got lost. Don't bind yourself to me. I'm a dead man walking anyway." Winona turned her head slightly, her eyes locking onto his. They were dark pools of desperation. "Do you want to die here, white man?" she hissed under her breath. "Do you want Iron Dog to take my father's place because he proved he could spill your blood? This is not about romance. This is about survival, mine as much as yours. But if you refuse," she said, her voice dropping to a terrifying calm, "they will kill you where you stand. And because I brought you in, I will bear the shame. My father's standing will break. The clan will fracture. Say yes, or you doom us both." Elias looked at the warriors. 321 men waiting for a sign. He looked at the chief, who watched him with a mixture of curiosity and pity. And he looked at Winona, who was holding her breath, her knuckles white. He had spent 5 years running from responsibility, running from the things he had done and the things he had failed to do. He was tired of running, and he could not let this woman pay the price for his bad luck. "I accept," Elias said loudly. The wind whipped the words away, but the interpreter heard. He nodded to the chief. The tension in the air shifted. It did not vanish, but it changed texture. The immediate threat of violence receded, replaced by a heavy, solemn weight. The ceremony began immediately. There was no changing of clothes, no feasting, no joy. It was a legal proceeding, a sealing of a contract witnessed by the morning sun and the armed men. The chief stepped forward and took a buffalo robe from a woman standing nearby. He draped it over Winona's shoulders. She stepped next to Elias, her face pale but composed. The interpreter instructed Elias to stand still. He tried, but the pain in his side was a gnawing rat. The world tilted gray at the edges. He swayed, his knees buckling. Before he could fall, a hand gripped his arm. It was Winona. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her fingers digging into his bicep. She pulled him upright, anchoring him against the wind. "Lean on me," she whispered, her lips barely moving. "Do not show them weakness." Elias gritted his teeth and forced his spine straight. He leaned into her, feeling the solid warmth of her presence. She did not pull away. Her hand remained on his arm, her thumb pressing rhythmically against his muscle. It was a touch that lingered longer than duty required, a silent transfer of strength. The chief spoke a few words, looking at the sky. He took a small pouch of pollen and scattered it over their heads. He then tied a strip of leather around Elias's left wrist and a matching one around Winona's right. "It is done," the interpreter said. There was no cheer. No one fired a rifle in celebration. The 321 warriors lowered their weapons, but their eyes remained cold. They looked at Elias not as a new brother, but as a tolerated danger, a wolf that had been allowed into the sheepfold on a technicality. The circle broke. The men turned and walked away, their silence heavy with judgment. Iron Dog lingered the longest, spitting into the dirt at Elias's feet before turning his back. Elias sagged, the adrenaline draining out of him. Winona kept him upright, guiding him back toward the lodge. "Not there," she said, steering him toward a smaller, older structure set slightly apart from the main circle. "My father's lodge is his own. We have a new place." They entered the smaller lodge. It was cold inside, the fire pit merely a bed of gray ash. Winona moved quickly, gathering kindling, striking a spark. Elias collapsed onto the pile of furs in the corner, clutching his side. He watched her as she worked. She moved with efficiency, her anger contained in the sharp movements of her hands. She got the fire going, then turned to him. She looked exhausted. The regal mask she had worn outside slipped, revealing a young woman burdened by a crushing weight. "Why?" Elias asked, his voice rough. "Why did you really do it?" She sat back on her heels, feeding a stick into the flames. "Because Iron Dog wants war," she said. "He wants to lead. If he had killed you, the soldiers would come looking for a missing white man. It would bring the fight he wants. My father is tired. He wants peace. I bought him time." "You bought him time with your life," Elias said. "You're stuck with me now." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "For now, until you are strong enough to leave, or until the snow melts." She stood up and came over to him. "Let me see the wound." She knelt beside him, her hands reaching for the hem of his shirt. Elias flinched, his hand shooting out to catch her wrist. It was a reflex, a survivor's instinct honed in back-alley fights and military skirmishes. "Don't," he warned. Winona didn't pull back. She looked at his hand gripping her wrist, then up at his eyes. "I am not your enemy." "Husband," she said, the word sounding strange and heavy in her mouth. "And if I wanted you dead, I would have left you on the riverbank." Elias slowly released her. He lay back, staring at the smoke hole, trying to slow his breathing. She peeled back the blood-stiffened bandages. Her touch was gentle, far gentler than he deserved. She cleaned the wound with warm water and a pungent salve that stung like fire. As she worked, Elias watched her face. He saw the strength in the set of her jaw, the grief she carried in the corners of her eyes. She was beautiful, yes, but it was a beauty forged in iron. She was holding up the sky for her people, and now she was holding him up too. Their hands brushed as she tied the fresh linen. The contact sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with pain. It was a spark of recognition. Two people trapped in a cage of circumstances, recognizing the same desperation in each other. She paused, her fingers resting on his chest for a heartbeat too long. Then she pulled away, wiping her hands on a rag. "Rest," she said, moving to the other side of the fire. "You will need your strength." Elias closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come. He reached into the hidden pocket of his trousers, checking for the object he guarded more closely than his own life. His fingers brushed the rough paper of the map, torn and refolded 100 times. He was not just a drifter. The map detailed a supply route that didn't exist on any official army chart, a route used for illegal shipments, a route he had been ordered to protect and then ordered to forget. And the name Elias Thorne was on a wanted poster in 3 territories, labeled a deserter and a murderer. He feared recognition more than he feared the bullet hole in his side. If these people found out who he really was, what he had been part of, the wedding vows wouldn't save him. The flap of the lodge lifted. It was the chief. He stepped inside, filling the small space. He looked at Winona, who bowed her head respectfully. And then he looked at Elias. The interpreter was not with him. The chief did not need one for this. He stepped close to where Elias lay. He pointed a finger at Elias's chest, right over the heart. "You live," the chief said. The English words heavy and distorted, like stones rolling in a riverbed. "Because of her." Elias nodded, maintaining eye contact. The chief leaned down, his face inches from Elias's. His eyes were hard, ancient, and terrifying. "But listen," the chief rumbled. "You are husband now. But if you bring bluecoats here, if you bring soldiers to my door—" He made a gesture, a sweeping motion of his hand toward the earth. "The ground will drink you dry." He straightened up, cast one last look at his daughter, and turned to leave. The flap fell shut behind him, leaving Elias and Winona alone in the dim, smoky silence. Elias looked at the woman who was now his wife. She was staring into the fire, her shoulders slumped. Outside, the wind howled again, rattling the lodge poles, sounding like 1,000 ghosts trying to get in. "I'm sorry," Elias said into the silence. "Don't be sorry," Winona said without looking up. "Be quiet and get well. The winter's just beginning." Elias lay back, the heat of the fire battling the chill in his bones. He was alive. He was married. And he was in the center of a storm that was only just starting to break. The days following the wedding did not bring warmth. They brought a cold that settled into the marrow of the bone and refused to leave. The camp of Chief Standing Elk was not a place of idle recovery. It was a machine of survival, grinding forward against the coming winter. Elias Thorne learned quickly that pity was a luxury these people could not afford. Even as his fever broke and the infection in his side began to retreat into a dull, manageable throb, the daily rhythm of the village demanded his participation. He watched from the entrance of the lodge as the women broke ice on the river's shallows to haul water in heavy skin bags, their hands red and raw. He saw men returning from hunts with less and less meat, the carcasses of deer gaunt and stringy. Rations were cut. The stew Winona brought him in the evenings grew thinner, more broth than substance. He ate it without complaint, wiping the wooden bowl clean with his finger. He learned to be small. He learned to be quiet. The camp was tense. Distant cracks of rifle fire would sometimes drift on the wind from the south, settler territory. Every time the sound echoed off the canyon walls, the camp would freeze. Mothers would pull their children close, hands muffling small mouths. Men would look to their weapons. Elias would feel the old, familiar tightening in his gut, the reflex of a soldier waiting for the order to advance or retreat. But no orders came, only the wind. Winona was rarely still. Elias watched her with a growing sense of bewilderment and respect. She was not merely the chief's daughter, a title that implied status but no labor. She was the spine of the operation. He saw her sitting with the elders, translating the rapid, hand-signed stories of a visiting scout into clear, precise speech for her father. He saw her grinding herbs with the camp's healer, an ancient woman with eyes like cloudy glass. Winona's hands, so delicate when she changed his bandages, were ruthless when she crushed roots and dried berries. She was a bridge. He realized this one evening as she sat repairing a moccasin near the fire. She stood between the old ways of her father and the encroaching, steel-edged world of the whites. Both sides seemed to punish her for it. The soldiers and agents at the fort looked at her with disdain because she was native. Some of her own people looked at her with suspicion because she spoke the tongue of the enemy. Inside their lodge, the air was thick with unspoken rules. Their marriage was a performance for the world outside the flap. When they stepped out to gather wood or attend a council fire, she would walk a half-step behind him, or he would stand close to her, mimicking the posture of a protective husband. But the moment the flap dropped, sealing them in the smoky twilight of their private space. The dynamic shifted instantly. Winona was the captain here. "You sit there," she had told him on the second night, pointing to the south side of the fire. "I sit here. We do not cross." It was a boundary line drawn in the dirt floor. "I am not your wife in the dark," she said, her voice devoid of cruelty but firm as iron. "I am your shield. Do not mistake the two." Elias struggled with the charity. He was a man used to paying his way, either with coin or labor, lying on the furs she provided, eating the food she cooked, owing his life to her quick thinking. It scraped against his pride like sandpaper. He tried to express gratitude once, after she had repacked his wound with fresh moss and salve. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "You don't have to be this gentle." Winona pulled her hands back as if he had burned her. "Do not read into it," she snapped. "A dead husband is of no use to me. A crippled one is a burden. I need you standing." So he stood. By the fourth day, Elias could walk without the world spinning. By the fifth, he was bored of being useless. He found a pile of damaged tack in the corner of the lodge, bridles with snapped reins, cinches worn through by friction. He asked for an awl and sinew. Winona gave them to him silently. He worked for hours, the repetitive motion of stitching leather quieting the noise in his head. He repaired 3 bridles that afternoon. When Winona returned from the river, she picked up his work, inspected the stitching, and gave a single, curt nod. The next morning, a broken rifle stock was left near his bedding. It was a Henry repeating rifle, the wood shattered near the trigger guard. A valuable weapon, rendered useless. Elias spent 2 days carving a replacement piece from a block of seasoned ash wood he found near the woodpile, fitting it with the precision of a man who knew that a jammed gun meant death. He was sitting outside the lodge, sanding the wood smooth with a rough stone, when a shadow fell over him. He looked up. Iron Dog stood there. The warrior was immense, his chest broad and powerful under a heavy buffalo coat. He did not speak. He just watched. His eyes moved from Elias's face to the rifle in his hands, then to the lodge where Winona was working. The resentment radiating off the man was palpable. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of a drunkard. It was the cold, patient hatred of a predator. Elias knew. Through the camp gossip Winona filtered to him, that Iron Dog had been the one expected to marry the chief's daughter. He was a celebrated hunter, a warrior with many coups to his name. To be displaced by a wounded, white drifter was an insult that likely burned in his gut every time he saw Elias breathe. Elias stopped sanding. He held the rifle loosely, not pointing it, but not surrendering it either. He met Iron Dog's stare. Iron Dog spat on the ground, a wet, heavy sound, and walked away. Elias let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. That evening, the tension inside the lodge felt different. It wasn't hostile, but it was charged. The wind was howling outside, battering the leather walls, making the fire dance wildly. Winona made tea from bitter roots. She poured 2 cups and handed one to him. Their fingers brushed. It was a mistake, a miscalculation of distance in the dim light. The contact lasted only a second, but Elias felt the jolt of it all the way to his toes. She did not pull away immediately. She looked at his hand, scarred, calloused, stained with gun oil, then up at his face. "You fixed the rifle," she said. "It shoots true now," Elias replied. "I checked the action. Iron Dog will not thank you for it," she said, blowing on her tea. "It was his brother's gun. I didn't do it for him." She looked at him over the rim of the cup. "Why then?" "Because I eat your food," Elias said. "And I don't like owing debts I can't pay." Winona lowered the cup. Her eyes softened. Just a fraction. It was the first time the guard had slipped since the wedding. "You pay your debts." "Elias," she said quietly, "you are not a lazy man." That is unexpected. It was a crumb of praise. But Elias hoarded it. As the weeks pushed toward the heart of winter, the camp moved into a rhythm of endurance. They dug storage pits into the frozen earth to hide dried meat and corn, insurance against the lean months. Elias helped dig, ignoring the protest of his healing side. The physical labor grounded him. It stopped him from thinking about the map in his pocket or the face of the commander he had left behind. But the past had a way of leaking out. One morning, a cooking pot clattered loudly against a rock near the fire. Elias was awake and halfway to a crouch before his eyes were fully open, his hand grasping for a pistol that wasn't there. His breathing was jagged, his eyes scanning the ridgeline for muzzle flashes. Winona was watching him from her side of the fire. She hadn't flinched. "You move like a soldier," she observed, her voice flat. Elias forced his muscles to relax. He sat back, running a hand through his hair. "I told you, I've done a lot of things. Drifters sleep heavy," she said. "Soldiers sleep with one eye open. Which army were you with?" "Does it matter?" Elias asked. "Defensive. It matters if they are the ones hunting us," she said. "They aren't hunting you," Elias lied. "Not for me." Winona didn't press, but the look she gave him said she knew a lie when she heard one. The truth of the tribe's situation began to clarify for Elias, pieced together from Winona's angry whispers and the heated debates in the council circle. The enemy wasn't just the cold. It was a man named Silas Vane, the Indian agent at the nearest reservation post, and his partner, a trader named McCrae. Winona explained it to him one night when the anger was too much to keep inside. "They count us like cattle," she said, pacing the small space of the lodge. "The government sends flour, blankets, beef. Vane takes half and sells it to the miners. He gives us the moldy flour, the beef that is sick, and when the young men get angry and steal a cow to feed their families. McCrae reports it as a raid. They're manufacturing a war," Elias said, "the strategy familiar and sickening." "Yes," she hissed. "If we are hostile, the army comes. If the army comes, the tribe is moved or killed, and Vane gets the land for grazing leases." The injustice of it burned in her voice. Elias watched her, seeing the firelight catch the sharp angles of her face. She was fierce, terrifyingly so. "And now," she continued, stopping her pacing to look at him, "the scouts say the town of Silver Creek is calling for protection. They say there are rumors. Rumors? About a wild woman," she said, her lip curling. "And her stolen white husband. They say I bewitched you, that you are a captive, tortured into submission." Elias let out a dry, humorless laugh. "If only they knew you were the one torturing me with this broth." Winona didn't smile, but the tension in her shoulders dropped an inch. "Why do you speak their language so well?" Elias asked, seizing the moment of quiet. "It's not just trading talk. You speak it like a schoolgirl." She finished. She sat down, pulling her knees to her chest. She stared into the fire, her expression distant. "I was 12, she said. The missionaries came. They told my father that if he wanted to save his people, his children had to learn the white man's paper. So he sent me." Elias waited. He knew this story. He had seen the schools. "They cut my hair," she said, touching the thick braid on her shoulder. "They took my clothes. If I spoke my own tongue, they put soap in my mouth. If I prayed to the 4 directions, they hit my hands with a ruler until they bled." She held out her hands. In the firelight, Elias could see faint, silvery scars across her knuckles. "I stayed for 3 years. She said, I learned their Bible. I learned their arithmetic. I learned that they hate us not for what we do, but for what we are." She looked at him, her eyes hard and dry. "I came back. I washed the soap from my mouth, but I kept the words. I sharpened them. Now I use them against them." Elias felt a profound ache in his chest. He reached out, not touching her, but letting his hand rest on the fur between them. "I am sorry," he said. "Do not be sorry." She repeated her mantra. "It made me useful." The intimacy between them grew not from romance, but from the shared weight of survival. It was in the way she would check his temperature with the back of her hand, her touch cool and efficient. It was in the way he would wake before dawn to stoke the fire so she wouldn't wake up to the cold. But the line between gratitude and desire was thinning. A blizzard struck the camp 2 weeks later. It was a white wall of fury that buried the lodges halfway to the smoke holes. The wind sounded like a freight train screaming through the canyon. The lodge poles creaked and groaned, bending under the pressure. They couldn't leave the lodge. For 2 days, they were sealed in together. On the second night, the storm reached a fever pitch. A massive gust slammed into the lodge, shaking the ground. Winona gasped, sitting up straight in the darkness. Elias was beside her in an instant. He didn't think. He just moved. He grabbed her arm, steadying her. "It's holding," he said, his voice close to her ear. "The poles are deep. It's holding. I hate the wind," she whispered, a rare admission of fear. "It sounds like the spirits of the dead." "I'm here," Elias said. "I'm right here." He didn't let go of her arm. In the dark, the boundaries they had drawn seemed to dissolve. "I can't sleep," he confessed, the words tumbling out. "Not when the wind is like this. I can't sleep unless I know you are safe." Winona turned toward him. He couldn't see her face, but he could feel her breath on his cheek. She took his hand, the hand that had killed men, the hand that had deserted a post, and she placed it flat against her chest. He felt the strong, steady thrum of her heart through the soft deerskin of her dress. "I am safe," she said. "Feel it. It does not waver." His hand rested there, over her life force. It was an intimacy more profound than nakedness. He felt the heat of her skin, the rhythm of her blood. "Elias," she breathed. He leaned in. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was magnetism. Suddenly, the lodge flap shook violently. Not the wind, a hand. Someone was outside. Elias jerked back, snatching his hand away. Winona stiffened, smoothing her dress. "Winona!" A voice called out. It was an elder woman's voice, harsh against the wind. "Are the skins holding?" Winona cleared her throat. "Yes," she shouted back. "We are secure." The footsteps crunched away. The moment was shattered, but the air in the lodge remained electric. They sat in the dark, breathing hard, the ghost of his hand still burning on her chest. "We should sleep," Winona said, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes," Elias said. "Sleep." Neither of them slept. The next day, the sun broke through, blindingly bright on the new snow. The camp emerged, digging out. The dynamic had shifted again. The husband and wife act was becoming harder to distinguish from reality. That afternoon, a group of women came to the lodge with food, a gift of dried plums and pemmican. It was a test. They wanted to see the couple. They wanted to see if the marriage was taking root. Elias and Winona sat side by side. He kept his arm touching hers. When she spoke to the women, she leaned into him slightly. One of the women made a joke, something bawdy about the long stormy nights. Winona laughed, a genuine sound that surprised Elias. He looked at her. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold and the laughter. She looked vibrant. Without thinking, he reached up and brushed a stray hair from her forehead. The women went silent, watching. Winona looked at him. Her eyes were wide. He leaned forward and kissed her. It was meant to be a performance, a seal on the lie they were living. But the moment his lips touched hers, the lie evaporated. Her lips were chapped but soft. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then pressed back. It wasn't a passionate, sweeping kiss. It was hesitant, hungry, and frighteningly tender. It tasted of wood smoke and dried plums. For 3 seconds, the rest of the room disappeared. Then Winona pulled back. Her eyes were dark and unreadable. She cleared her throat and turned back to the women, her composure fighting to return. The women giggled and nodded, satisfied. They left soon after. When they were alone, the silence was deafening. "That was necessary," Winona said, not looking at him. "To convince them." "Yes," Elias said, his voice tight. "Necessary." But they both knew it was more than that. They had crossed a line, and there was no way to uncross it. From that day on, he stopped calling her the girl or hey in his mind. He practiced her name, Winona. He said it when they walked to the river. He said it when he handed her the repaired tools. "It's Winona," she corrected him gently one day. The O is rounder. "Winona," he repeated, shaping his mouth around the syllables. She smiled. Better. It was a small rebellion. The soldiers called her squaw. The settlers called her savage. Elias called her by her name, giving her the dignity the world tried to strip away. But the bubble of their relative peace could not hold. 3 weeks later, a messenger arrived. He rode a pony that was lathered and blowing hard. Despite the cold, he went straight to the chief's lodge. Winona was summoned immediately. Elias waited, pacing the length of their lodge, the old dread churning in his stomach. She returned an hour later. Her face was ashen. "What is it?" Elias asked. "Soldiers," she said. "A column from Fort Laramie. They are moving north." "North?" Elias asked. "That's away from here. Not this time," she said. "The messenger says they have orders to secure the valley before the deep snows. They are coming to move us. Move the whole band? In winter. That's a death march." Winona nodded grimly. "And Vane, the agent, he has given them a list, a census. He is counting heads. Every man, woman, and child must be accounted for against the ration rolls." Elias felt the blood drain from his face. "If they check the rolls, if they check the people, they will check everyone," Winona said. "They will look at every face." Elias turned away, staring at the leather wall. He couldn't hide, not if they were counting heads. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the map. He stared at it for a long moment, then crumpled it in his fist. "Winona," he said. He turned to face her. She was watching him, fear warring with resolve in her eyes. "You need to know something," he said. "You need to know who you really married." "I know who you are," she said. "You are Elias." "No," he said. "My name is Elias Thorne, Sergeant Elias Thorne of the 3rd Cavalry." The room went deadly silent. Winona took a step back. Her hand went to her mouth. "Thorne?" she whispered. "I deserted 3 months ago," he said, the words coming out fast now. "After the massacre at Sand Creek, I couldn't do it anymore. But I took something with me. This map. It proves Vane is stealing the supplies. It proves the commander is taking a cut." Winona stared at him, horror dawning in her eyes. "Thorne," she repeated, her voice trembling. "What?" Elias asked. "I was at the trading post before the snows." She said, "I saw a paper, a notice nailed to the door." Elias closed his eyes. He knew what was coming. "Wanted," she recited, her memory perfect and cruel, "for desertion, theft of military property, and murder of a superior officer. Elias Thorne, $500 reward, dead or alive." She looked at him, and for the first time, Elias saw genuine terror in her eyes. "Not for herself, for him. If the soldiers come," she whispered, "they aren't just coming to move the tribe. They are coming for you." Elias looked at his wife. The trap had snapped shut. "Then we can't let them find me here," he said, "because if they find me with you, they will kill us all," she finished. The wind that tore through the high plains did not merely signal the coming of winter. It announced a siege. The tribe of Chief Standing Elk had moved 3 days prior, retreating from the exposed river basin to a sheltered valley known as the Deep Creek, where the canyon walls rose high enough to break the gale. But even here, the cold was a living thing. It seeped through the thickest buffalo robes, froze the water in the skin bags before it could be poured, and turned the breath of the horses into clouds of shattered glass. Elias Thorne felt the cold in the metal of the rifle he carried, but mostly he felt it in the silence of the camp. Hunger had arrived before the snow. The game trails were empty, the deer having moved south or hidden deep in the timber. The rations in the camp were strictly measured: a handful of dried meat, a scoop of parched corn. Elias watched the children. They did not run or play between the lodges anymore. They sat close to the fires, conserving energy, their eyes large and dark in faces that were becoming too thin. He worked to keep the silence from eating him alive. He chopped wood until his hands blistered and callus grew over the blisters. He hauled water with the women, ignoring the sullen stares of the young warriors who believed such work was beneath a man, even a white one. Winona worked harder. She was the spine that kept the lodge upright. She moved with a desperate economy, wasting no motion. When she looked at him across the fire in the evenings, her face was gaunt, the sharp angles of her cheekbones casting shadows in the flickering light. "We have enough for 2 weeks," she told him one night, scraping the bottom of the cooking pot. "If the snow holds off." "And if it doesn't?" Elias asked. She did not answer. She handed him the bowl, containing the larger portion, as she always did. He tried to push it back, but she fixed him with a stare that brokered no argument. "Eat," she said. "I cannot haul you if you fall." The isolation of the valley was broken 4 days later by the arrival of a trader. He was a man named Gasket, a peddler who drove a mule-drawn wagon piled high with pots, blankets, and dubious tinctures. He was allowed into the camp not out of friendship, but because the tribe was desperate for ammunition and salt. Elias stayed inside the lodge, cleaning his rifle, but the camp was small. Discovery was inevitable. Gasket came to the chief's fire to haggle. Elias was outside, stretching a hide, when the trader walked past. Gasket was a short man with a beard that looked like a bird's nest and eyes that shifted constantly, weighing the value of everything they touched. He stopped when he saw Elias. The wind whistled through the bare branches of the cottonwoods. Gasket took a slow pull from a flask at his hip, his eyes narrowing. He didn't speak immediately. He walked a circle around Elias, looking at his boots, the cut of his trousers, and finally, his face. "You are a long way from the garrison, friend," Gasket said, his voice greasy with false cheer. "I am where I belong," Elias replied, not looking up from his work. "Are you now?" Gasket stepped closer. "You have the look of a man I saw on a poster back at Fort Laramie, a poster with a very heavy price on it, $500, if I recall, for a man named Thorne." Elias stopped scraping the hide. He gripped the handle of the tool, his knuckles white. "I don't know any Thorne," Elias said, his voice low. "And I don't have $500. "No," Gasket laughed, a wet, hacking sound. "But the Army does, and the Indian agent, Mr. Vane, he pays double for information that leads to the capture of renegades, especially ones who steal maps." Elias stood up slowly, towering over the smaller men. Gasket took a quick step back, his hand dropping to the knife at his belt. "You are mistaken," Elias said. "Maybe." Gasket grinned, revealing yellow teeth. "Maybe not. But the road is long, and a man has time to think." He turned and walked away, whistling a tune that grated on Elias's nerves like a file on steel. That night, the tension in the camp broke. It did not start with soldiers. It started with smoke. Just before dusk, a pillar of black smoke rose from the south, staining the purple sky. It was coming from the direction of the Miller Ranch, a settler outpost on the edge of the territory. "Whiskey runners," Winona whispered as they watched the smoke from the ridge. "They burn the ranchers out, steal the stock, and then blame us." "It's a frame-up," Elias said. "The military tactics clear in his mind. They create the crime and leave a trail leading right to your doorstep." The retaliation came swiftly. It was not a disciplined military advance, but a chaotic, lightning-fast raid under the cover of darkness. Elias was sleeping lightly, his hand near the rifle stock, when the first shot cracked the frozen air. It was followed by the scream of a horse and the terrifying, high-pitched war cries of men trying to sound like something they were not. "Get down!" Elias shouted, rolling off the furs and dragging Winona to the floor. Bullets punched through the leather walls of the lodge, ripping through the space where they had been sleeping seconds before. Outside, the camp erupted into mayhem. Women screamed, dogs barked, and the thunder of hooves tore through the center of the village. Elias grabbed his rifle and crawled to the flap. "Stay here," he ordered Winona. "I am not a child," she hissed, grabbing her knife. Elias rolled out into the snow. The night was lit by the muzzle flashes of riders galloping between the lodges, firing indiscriminately. They were not wearing uniforms. They wore long dusters and hats pulled low. Elias raised his Henry rifle. He did not fire wildly. He took a breath, aimed at a rider preparing to torch the winter food stores, and squeezed the trigger. The man flew backward off his horse, the torch landing harmlessly in the snow. The raid lasted less than 10 minutes, as quickly as they had come. The riders wheeled their mounts and vanished into the dark, leaving behind the smell of gunpowder and death. Elias scrambled to his feet. Scanning the darkness, the camp was in shock. Wailing rose from the far side of the circle. He ran toward the sound. Winona was already there. A crowd had gathered around a small form lying in the snow. It was a boy, no older than 10, Swift Fox. He was Winona's cousin, a bright-eyed child who had taught Elias how to snare rabbits. A stray bullet had found him as he ran for cover. Winona was on her knees, her hands pressed against the boy's chest, but the blood was dark and spreading fast. She looked up at Elias, her face a mask of shattered grief. "He is gone," she whispered. The grief in the camp did not stay as sorrow. It curdled instantly into rage. The next morning, the council met. The air was thick with the desire for violence. The body of Swift Fox was wrapped in a blanket, waiting for the burial scaffold, a silent testament to the cost of their existence. Iron Dog stood in the center of the circle. He looked like a demon of vengeance, his face painted with black ash. He pointed a shaking finger at Elias. "It is him!" Iron Dog roared, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Before he came, we were hungry, but we were safe. Now the white men come. The traitor sees him, and the next night, death rides into our camp. He is the beacon." A murmur of agreement ran through the assembled warriors. Eyes turned to Elias, hard and unforgiving. They needed a reason for the boy's death, and Elias was a convenient one. "He draws them here," Iron Dog continued, pacing like a caged wolf. "He is cursed. His shadow brings the soldiers. We must cut the rot out before it kills the whole tree. Give him to the spirits. Leave his body on the boundary line as a message that we are clean of him." 2 warriors stepped forward, grabbing Elias by the arms. He did not fight. He looked at the chief, who sat with his head bowed, the weight of his people crushing him. Then Winona stepped into the circle. She did not ask for permission. She walked to the center and shoved Iron Dog back with a force that surprised them both. "You are a fool, Iron Dog," she said, her voice shaking not with fear, but with fury. "You think killing this man will stop Vane? You think it will stop the whiskey runners? They do not need him to hate us. They hate us because we breathe." She turned to the council, tears streaming down her face, freezing on her cheeks. "You want blood?" she demanded. "Go take it from the men who killed my cousin. But do not spill it here and call it justice. This man fought beside us last night. I saw him drop the rider who tried to burn the corn." Iron Dog sneered. "He fought to save his own skin. He is a coward who ran from his own war." Elias stepped forward, shaking off the hands that held him. "I ran," Elias said, his voice cutting through the wind. The council went silent. "I ran," he repeated, looking at the chief. "I was a sergeant. My commander, Major Lynch, ordered us to attack a camp on the Sand Creek. He said they were hostiles, but when we rode over the ridge..." Elias's voice broke. He swallowed hard and forced the words out. "They were old men, women, children under a flag of truce. I told my men to hold fire. Lynch shot the man next to me for disobeying. I didn't run from the war. I ran from the murder." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled map. "This shows the supply lines Vane uses to smuggle the whiskey." He said, "Lynch protects him. They are using the war as a cover to get rich. I have the proof. That is why they want me dead. Not because I'm a deserter, but because I am a witness." The chief looked up. He stared at Elias for a long time, measuring the truth in his eyes. "If this is true," the chief said slowly, "then you are a danger to us, but you are also a weapon." The reprieve was temporary, and the peace was fragile. The camp remained on high alert. 2 days later, the sky turned a bruised purple, promising a storm of biblical proportions. Winona took 2 ponies and went to the river to break the ice for the evening water. She insisted on going alone, needing the silence to mourn her cousin. Elias was repairing a cinch in the lodge when the feeling hit him. It was a cold prickle at the base of his neck. He grabbed his rifle and ran toward the river. He was too late. He crested the bank just in time to see a struggle on the ice. 3 men, rough-looking, bearded, wearing the heavy coats of the whiskey gang, were wrestling Winona onto a horse. She fought like a wildcat, slashing with her knife, but one of the men struck her hard across the face with the butt of a pistol. She went limp. "No!" Elias roared. Raising his rifle, He fired, but the men were already spurring their horses up the far bank. The bullet kicked up snow inches from the lead rider. "We got the squaw," one of them shouted. "That's our ticket." They disappeared into the tree line, heading toward the pass that led back to the fort. They were taking her to trade. She was leverage, proof that the tribe was hostile, or perhaps a bargaining chip to force Elias out of hiding. Elias scrambled down the bank, sliding on the ice. He found her waterskins overturned, her knife lying in the snow with a smear of blood on the handle. He stood there, panting, the rage boiling his blood. Iron Dog appeared on the ridge, attracted by the gunshot. He looked down at the scene, then at Elias. "They took her," Elias said, his voice trembling. Iron Dog looked at the tracks. "Then it is finished. She is gone. I'm going after her," Elias said, climbing the bank. "You will die," Iron Dog said. "The storm is coming. Then I die," Elias snarled. He ran back to the horse lines. He didn't bother with the saddle. He threw a bridle on the strongest pony, a bay mare with a white blaze. As he mounted, a young warrior rode up beside him. It was Two Moons, a friend of Swift Fox. He had a repeater across his lap and a grim determination in his eyes. "I ride with you," Two Moons said, "for Swift Fox." They rode out as the first flakes of the blizzard began to fall. The tracking was a nightmare. The wind erased the hoof prints almost as soon as they were made. Elias rode by instinct and hatred. He pushed the mare hard, knowing that if they lost the trail now, Winona was gone forever. They caught them in a narrow box canyon 5 miles from the river. The whiskey runners had stopped to cinch a saddle, thinking the storm covered their tracks. There were 4 of them. Elias didn't wait for a plan. He signaled Two Moons to take the right flank, and he rode straight down the center. The firefight was brief, violent, and ugly. Elias shot the man guarding Winona. The man spun and fell into the snow. The other 3 returned fire. A bullet grazed Elias's thigh, tearing through the fabric but missing the bone. He leaped from his horse, hitting the ground rolling. He came up firing. He saw Two Moons take a hit to the shoulder but keep shooting. One of the runners charged Elias, a Bowie knife in his hand. Elias's rifle clicked empty. He swung the barrel, clubbing the man in the jaw with a sickening crunch. The man went down, but grabbed Elias's leg. They grappled in the snow, a desperate tangle of limbs and grunts. Elias felt the man's knife slice his forearm. The pain was distant. He found a rock in the snow, a jagged piece of shale, and brought it down on the man's temple. Once, twice. The man stopped moving. Elias scrambled up, gasping for air. Two Moons had the other 2 pinned down behind a boulder, but they were fleeing, scrambling up the shale slope to escape the madman who had just bludgeoned their partner. Elias didn't chase them. He ran to the horse where Winona was tied. She was conscious, blood running from a cut on her forehead. She looked at him, her eyes unfocused. "Elias?" she whispered. "I've got you," he choked out. "I've got you." He cut the ropes. She fell into his arms, and he held her so tight he thought he might crack her ribs. The blizzard descended with full fury. The world turned white. They could not make it back to the valley. The wind was a wall that pushed them back. "There is a place," Two Moons groaned, clutching his shoulder. "A rock shelf. Up the ridge." They led the horses up the treacherous slope, fighting for every step. They found the overhang, a shallow cave protected by a lip of stone. It was barely enough room for the 3 of them and the horses, but it was out of the wind. They huddled in the darkness. Two Moons passed out from the pain in his shoulder. Elias checked the wound. It was clean. Through the meat. He bound it tight. Then he turned to Winona. They sat against the back wall of the cave, wrapped in the buffalo robes they had stripped from the dead whiskey runner's saddle. The cold was a physical weight pressing against them. "You came," she said. Her voice was small, lost in the howling of the wind outside. "Of course I came," Elias said. He was shaking, not from the cold, but from the adrenaline crash. His hands, stained with blood that wasn't his, trembled violently. He looked at his hands. "I had to hurt him, to stop him." Winona reached out and took his shaking hands in hers. Her skin was freezing, but her grip was strong. "You did what survival demanded," she said fiercely. "Do not apologize for keeping breath in your lungs. Do not apologize for keeping it in mine." She pulled him closer. The space between them vanished. In the darkness of the cave, with death waiting just outside the circle of their warmth, the barriers of duty and arrangement dissolved completely. She didn't look at him like a political necessity. She looked at him like a man. "I do not want a shield, Elias," she whispered, her lips inches from his. "I have warriors for shields. I want you, the man who is afraid, the man who stays anyway." Elias looked at her, the bruise blooming on her cheek, the fire in her eyes. He realized he had stopped running. "Winona," he breathed. He kissed her. This time, there was no audience. There was no pretense. It was a collision of fear and relief. Her mouth was warm, tasting of iron and snow. She pulled him down, her hands tangling in his hair, anchoring him to the earth. Their intimacy was a trembling thing, fierce and desperate. Whispered names against skin, the friction of bodies seeking heat, the aching, terrifying realization that they belonged to each other not by law, but by blood and choice. When the storm broke the next morning, the world was silent and buried in white. They prepared to leave. 2 Moons was weak, but could ride. As Elias went to saddle the horses, he kicked something half buried in the snow near the dead runner's saddlebags. It was a crate. It had split open during the fight. Inside were bottles of cheap whiskey, but it was the wood of the crate that stopped Elias's heart. Burned into the side, clear as day, was the brand. VTTC, Vane Trading Company. Gov contract 404, and stuck in the slat of the wood was a scrap of paper, a shipping manifest tucked there by a careless clerk. It listed flour, 50 barrels, but the handwriting next to it noted whiskey, 20 cases, Dest, North Ridge. North Ridge was where the raids always started. "We have it," Elias said, holding up the slat of wood. "We have the link. Vane is supplying the whiskey to the raiders using government wagons." Winona looked at the wood, then at Elias. Her face hardened. "Then we go back," she said. "And we finish this." The return to the camp was solemn. They rode in like ghosts returning from the underworld. When they entered the chief's lodge, Elias laid the wood and the manifest on the ground before standing elk. He told the story. He told them about the men, the fight, and the brand. The chief listened. He looked at his daughter's bruised face. He looked at 2 Moons' bandaged shoulder. And he looked at the crate. He stood up. The grief that had bowed his shoulders seemed to evaporate, replaced by a cold, deadly resolve. He did not call for a defense. He did not call for a retreat. "At dawn," he said, his voice rolling like thunder, "we go to the fort." He looked at Elias. "You will guide us. You will show them this proof. And you will not go alone." The next morning, the sun rose on a sight that chilled Elias to the bone, yet filled him with a strange, fierce pride. Waiting in the valley, mounted on their war ponies, their faces painted for battle, were the warriors. They were not in a circle this time. They were in a column. 321 men. They were not waiting for a wedding. They were waiting for war. The journey to Fort Defiance was a march through a white purgatory. The column of 321 warriors moved with a silence that unnerved even the wolves trailing in their wake. There was no singing, no boasting, only the rhythmic crunch of frozen snow under the hooves of war ponies and the creak of leather stiffened by the frost. Elias Thorne rode near the front, flanked by Iron Dog and 2 Moons. The injury in his thigh burned with the cold, a constant dull reminder of the whiskey runners. But he kept his spine straight. He watched Winona. She rode a dun mare, wrapped in layers of buffalo hide, her face set in a mask of grim determination. Every mile they put behind them seemed to strip away a layer of her softness, replacing it with something harder, something brittle and sharp like obsidian. The land fought them. They crossed streams where the ice was deceptive, thick at the edges but rotting in the center. They spent long nights huddled in shallow ravines where the wind sounded like distant, rhythmic crying, a sound that made the horses stamp and roll their eyes. On the 5th day, The wilderness gave way to the scarred earth of settlement. They passed the boundary markers of the Miller Ranch, now just a blackened chimney and a few charred posts protruding from the snow. The work of the whiskey runners, blamed on the tribe. As the column moved onto the main road leading to the town of Crossing, the reception changed from the indifference of nature to the hostility of man. Crossing was a collection of rough-cut lumber buildings and muddy streets that had frozen into ruts. As the column of warriors appeared on the ridge, a bell began to ring in the town, a frantic, clanging alarm. They did not ride through the town. The chief was wise enough to skirt the perimeter, but the town came out to watch. Men stood on porches and rooftops, rifles cradled in their arms, their breath steaming in the air. Women peered through curtains, their faces pale with a mixture of terror and fascination. Elias felt the hatred washing over them. It was a physical thing, heavier than the snow. As they passed a small, whitewashed church on the edge of the settlement, a man in a black coat stepped out. He was a preacher, his face red with the cold and righteousness. He pointed a shaking finger at Winona. "Behold the temptation," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Behold the pagan snare that drags good men to hell." A glob of spit flew from the crowd, landing on the flank of Winona's mare. The horse danced sideways. Winona did not look at the preacher. She did not wipe the spit away. She stared straight ahead, her chin lifted so high it looked painful. A man near the blacksmith shop raised a rifle. "Tracking Elias! You traitor!" the man yelled. "You filth!" Elias's hand drifted to the Navy Colt at his hip. He felt the tension ripple through the warriors behind him. 321 hands tightened on lances and repeaters. One shot. That was all it would take to turn this muddy road into a slaughterhouse. "Don't," Winona said. She had not looked at him, but she sensed his movement. "Do not give them the excuse." Elias moved his hand away from the gun, but he rode closer to her, placing his horse between her and the crowd. He felt the eyes of his own people on him, judging his restraint, and the eyes of the settlers, judging his betrayal. He belonged to neither world now. He was an island, drifting in a sea of hostility. They reached the fort at midday. Fort Defiance was a sprawling complex of timber and stone, the American flag snapping violently in the wind above the parade ground. The gates were closed. Along the walls, blue-coated sentries walked their posts, their rifles shouldered. The column halted. The chief signaled for a parley. The gates groaned open, but only wide enough for a small group. A chaotic scene ensued as officials in heavy wool coats spilled out, flanked by a squad of armed soldiers. "You cannot bring a war party to a federal outpost," a lieutenant shouted, his hand resting on his saber. "We come for justice," the chief's interpreter called back. "We come with proof." "We will hear the chief," the lieutenant said, eyeing the line of warriors with a nervous sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "And the white man. The rest stay back." Elias dismounted. Winona did the same. As they walked toward the gate, the lieutenant stepped in front of Winona. "Not her," he said. "She is my witness." The chief said, "She is a squaw." The lieutenant spat. "And this is military business." "She is my wife," Elias said, his voice low and dangerous. The lieutenant looked at Elias, a sneer curling his lip. "According to who? A savage right? That don't hold water here. Mister, in the eyes of the law, she is property of the state, and you," he looked Elias up and down, recognizing the face from the wanted posters. "You are a criminal. You are under arrest." Before Elias could react, soldiers surged forward. They didn't grab him. They grabbed Winona. "No!" Elias shouted, lunging forward. A rifle butt slammed into his gut. He doubled over, gasping. He saw Winona being dragged away, not toward the council room, but toward the stockade. She didn't scream. She looked back at him, her eyes wide and dark, before she was shoved through a heavy wooden door. "Take him to the colonel," the lieutenant ordered. Elias was hauled to his feet, wheezing. He realized then that the law he had come to serve was not a shield. It was a bludgeon, and they were about to be beaten to death with it. He was marched across the parade ground, past the staring faces of soldiers who looked at him with a mix of curiosity and disgust. He was taken to the headquarters building, but instead of the main office, he was shoved into a small, windowless interrogation room. He waited for an hour. The room was cold, smelling of stale tobacco and damp wood. The door opened. It wasn't the colonel. It was Major Lynch. Elias felt the blood freeze in his veins. Lynch looked older than Elias remembered, his face puffier, the veins in his nose broken from too much drink. But his eyes were the same, cold, pale blue, devoid of empathy. "Sergeant Thorne," Lynch said, closing the door softly. "You look like a dog that's been kicked too many times." "I am not a sergeant," Elias rasped. "Not anymore." "No," Lynch agreed, pulling out a chair and sitting opposite him. "Now you are a deserter, a thief, and a consort to hostiles. That is a hanging offense." "Elias." "I have the ledger," Elias said, cutting to the chase. "I have the crate from the whiskey runners. It has the Vane Trading Company brand. It has the government contract number." Lynch didn't flinch. He smiled. A thin, tight expression. "Paper burns." "Elias, wood splinters. Do you really think a few scraps of trash will outweigh the word of a decorated officer and a government agent?" "It will if I take it to a judge," Elias said. "It will if I take it to the newspapers in St. Louis." Lynch leaned forward. "You will never see St. Louis. You will never leave this fort. Unless—" He let the word hang in the air. "Unless what?" "Unless you help us." Lynch said, "We know the tribe uses the high passes to move between the summer and winter grounds. We know they have caches of weapons hidden in the caves. You give us the locations. You sign a statement saying the raid on the ranch was ordered by Standing Elk. You want me to lie?" Elias said. "I want you to be practical," Lynch corrected. "You do this, and the desertion charge disappears. You get a pardon. You walk out of here a free man." "And Winona?" Elias asked. "She goes to the reservation," Lynch said, waving a hand dismissively. "Where she belongs, she will be cared for." "Cared for like the people at Sand Creek?" Elias asked, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Cared for like the children starving in the valley?" Lynch's face hardened. He stood up, knocking the chair back. "You have a lot of morals for a man with a noose around his neck. Think about it. Thorne, you have until the hearing tomorrow morning." He turned to the door. "Oh, and Elias, if you refuse, I won't just hang you. I will make sure the girl is educated on the proper place of her kind before we send her away." The door slammed shut, leaving Elias in the dark. Elias was moved to a holding cell in the guardhouse. It was a cage of iron bars in the center of a larger room. He sat on the cot, his head in his hands. The threat against Winona made his stomach churn with acid. He knew Lynch. He knew the man was capable of anything. Late that night, the outer door opened. A soldier brought in a tray of food, hardtack and watery coffee, but the man didn't leave immediately. He was older, stooped, wearing a uniform that was frayed at the cuffs. He looked around nervously, then slipped a piece of folded paper through the bars. "My name is Abernathy," the man whispered. "I'm the clerk for the quartermaster." Elias took the paper, hiding it in his palm. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I keep the books," Abernathy hissed. "I see the numbers. Vane is stealing 70% of the beef allotment. The flour is mixed with sawdust. I have a wife, Mr. Thorne. I have a baby girl. I cannot sleep at night knowing what I am signing." Elias unfolded the paper. It was a page torn from a private ledger. It listed payments from Vane to Major Lynch. "Protection fees," it was labeled. "This is it," Elias whispered. "This connects them. There is more." Abernathy said, "Dr. Reed, the post-surgeon. He examined the beef Vane delivered last month. He wrote a report saying it was diseased, unfit for consumption. Lynch buried the report. The doctor is willing to speak." "Where is he?" "He will be at the hearing," Abernathy said, "but you must be careful. Lynch is desperate. He has sent riders to bring in more men. He plans to disarm the warriors tomorrow." Elias gripped the bars. "Where is Winona?" "She is in the women's holding block," Abernathy said. "Down the corridor, third door on the left. Can I see her?" Abernathy hesitated. "The guard on duty owes me money. I can give you 2 minutes. No more." The clerk disappeared. 10 minutes later, The heavy door at the end of the corridor creaked open. The guard, a young corporal with a bored expression, jerked his head. "Make it quick, prisoner." Elias was led down the hallway. He stopped at the third door. It was a solid oak door with a small, barred window at eye level. "Winona," he whispered. A face appeared at the window. She looked tired, her hair coming loose from its braids, a bruise darkening on her cheekbone, but her eyes were clear. "Elias," she breathed. "Are you hurt?" "No," he said, pressing his hand against the bars. "I'm fine. Listen to me. Lynch offered me a deal." "I know," she said. "They offered me one too. They said if I testify that you kidnapped me, that you forced me to lead you to the camp, they will let my father go. What did you tell them?" "I told them that I would cut out my own tongue before I spoke a lie for them." Elias rested his forehead against the cold wood of the door. The closeness was agonizing. He could smell the sage smoke that still clung to her dress, a scent of home in this place of stone and iron. "I'm scared." "Winona," he admitted, the words barely audible. "Not of dying. I'm scared of what they will do to you if I fail." Lynch threatened. He couldn't finish the sentence. "Elias, look at me." He raised his eyes to the small window. "Do not let them use your love as a weapon," she said fiercely. "That is what they want. They want you to be small. They want you to be afraid." "I am afraid," he said, "because I love you, and that gives them a target." "Then let them target it," she said. "Love is not a permission for you to control my fate. Elias, it is permission for you to stand beside me. Stand beside me tomorrow. Do not bend." The guard rattled his keys. "Time's up." Elias pressed his fingers through the mesh of the window. Winona met them with her own. For a second, their skin touched, warm, alive, defiant. "I will not bend," he promised. The next morning, the hearing was held in the mess hall, which had been converted into a makeshift courtroom. The tables were pushed aside, and a long bench was set up for the tribunal. A colonel from a neighboring district presided. A man named Colonel Vance, who looked bored and annoyed to be there. Lynch sat at the prosecution table, looking smug. The room was packed. Soldiers lined the walls. The chief and his interpreter sat on one side. Elias and Winona were brought in separately and seated near the center. Lynch began his opening statement, painting a picture of chaos. He described the tribe as a band of marauders, led by a senile chief and his seductress daughter, aided by a traitorous deserter who had turned his back on his country for savage pleasures. He called his witnesses, men Elias recognized as part of the whiskey gang, cleaned up and dressed in suits, swearing they were honest ranchers terrorized by the tribe. Then it was Elias's turn. He stood up. His leg throbbed, but he did not limp. "Major Lynch speaks of honor," Elias said, his voice carrying to the back of the room. "But there is no honor in starving children. There is no honor in selling government beef to minors while families eat boiled leather." He pulled the ledger page Abernathy had given him from his pocket. "Object," Lynch shouted. Jumping up, "That is stolen property." "It is evidence," Elias shouted back. "This proves Lynch is on Vane's payroll, and I have a witness." He pointed to the back of the room. "Doctor." Reed stood up. The surgeon looked terrified, but he nodded. "I wrote the report." The doctor said, his voice shaking, "The beef was diseased. Major Lynch ordered me to burn the findings." The room erupted in murmurs. Colonel Vance banged his gavel. "Silence!" Vance looked at Lynch, his eyes narrowing. "Major, is this true? It is a fabrication." Lynch sputtered. "A conspiracy." Then Winona stood up. She did not wait to be called. She wore her deerskin dress, stained with the dust of the trail. She looked wild and undeniably regal. "Your Honor," she said. Her English was perfect, the accent gone, the tone polished and precise. The room fell dead silent. They had expected grunts or broken pigeon. They heard the voice of an educated woman. "They call us savages," she continued, looking directly at Colonel Vance, "because we fight to keep what is ours. But who is the savage? The man who kills to feed his family, or the man who kills to pad his pocket?" She pointed at Lynch. This man is not a soldier. He is a merchant of death. He creates war because peace is not profitable. My husband? She looked at Elias, and the word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. My husband risked his life to bring this truth to you. Not to save himself, but to save the belief that your law might actually mean something. Lynch was turning purple. He slammed his fist on the table. Enough of this. Guard, seize them. Sit down. Major. Colonel Vance barked. But Lynch wasn't listening. He signaled to the window. Outside, a bugle blew. The sound of shouting erupted from the parade ground. Gunfire cracked, sharp, panicked bursts. What is that? Vance demanded. Lynch smiled. A cruel, twisted expression. That, Colonel, is security. I have ordered the disarmament of the hostiles. We are seizing their horses. You did what? Vance stood up, horrified. You'll start a massacre. It's already started. Lynch said. Elias didn't think. He reacted. He kicked the heavy oak table, sending it crashing into Lynch's legs. As the major went down, Elias grabbed Winona's hand. Run, he shouted. Chaos swallowed the room. Soldiers drew weapons, but the confusion was absolute. Elias drove his shoulder into a guard who blocked their path, sending the man sprawling. He grabbed the guard's revolver from his holster. They burst out of the mess hall into the cold sunlight. The parade ground was a war zone. Soldiers were trying to corral the ponies. Warriors were fighting back with lances and knives. The 321 men had not come to be disarmed. They had come ready. Iron Dog was on his horse, swinging a war club, driving back a group of infantrymen. He saw Elias and Winona emerging. Here, Iron Dog shouted, kicking a riderless horse toward them. Elias boosted Winona onto the horse and swung up behind her. He wrapped one arm around her waist and fired the revolver with the other, suppressing the soldiers pouring out of the barracks. To the gate, Elias screamed. The chief was already there, rallying the men. They were not fighting to take the fort. They were fighting to break out. The column smashed through the confused sentries at the main gate like a battering ram. They galloped out onto the open snow, the wind whipping their hair. Behind them, the fort alarm bell clanged uselessly. They rode hard for a mile, putting distance between them and the rifles. Then they slowed, the horses blowing hard in the cold air. Elias looked back. The fort was a smudge of gray smoke against the white horizon. He looked down at the ledger page still crumbled in his hand, and the wooden slat from the crate tucked in his saddlebag. They had the evidence. They had the truth. But Lynch was still in command, and now there was no going back. Winona leaned back against him, her body trembling with the aftershocks of the escape. We are at war now, she said, her voice flat. Yes, Elias said, reloading the revolver with shaking hands. We declared it the moment we walked out that door. The chief rode up beside them. He looked at Elias, then at the fort. The law did not listen, the chief said. Not today, Elias said. But there are other judges. Higher up, we have to get this to the territory capital, to the governor. That is 5 days' ride, Iron Dog said. Riding up on their other side, through the storm, with the army behind us. Then we ride fast, Winona said. She reached back and covered Elias's hand with hers. We do not run to hide, she said. We run to fight. Elias squeezed her hand. He looked at the vast, indifferent landscape stretching out before them. He was a wanted man. Again. But this time, he wasn't running away from his ghosts. He was running alongside them. The retreat from the fort was not a flight. It was a race against the melting earth. The unseasonable Chinook wind that had aided their escape now turned the plains into a treacherous slurry of mud and slush. The creeks, frozen solid only days before, were now swollen. Angry veins of brown water cutting across the landscape. Elias Thorne rode with his head down against the spray of mud thrown up by the hooves of the lead ponies. His leg, grazed by the bullet during the rescue and battered in the escape, throbbed with a sickly, hot rhythm. But he did not slow down. Beside him, Winona rode with a terrifying focus. She did not look back at the smudge of smoke that was Fort Defiance. She looked only ahead, toward the valley where the women, children, and elders waited. Every mile felt hunted. The horizon seemed to possess eyes. They knew Lynch would not let this stand. A court-martial offense was one thing. A public humiliation involving a prison break and the theft of damning evidence was another. The major would burn the territory to the ground to bury his secrets. They reached the main encampment 2 days later. The horses were blown, their flanks heaving, lathered in sweat despite the biting wind. The mood in the valley was not one of relief. It was a taut, vibrating silence. The scouts had already brought word. "Militia," Iron Dog said, meeting them at the perimeter. He looked at the exhausted horses and the grim faces of the returning party. "They are gathering at the crossing. Not just soldiers, men from the mines, men from the saloons. Vane has opened the whiskey barrels and the ammunition crates. They are coming to kill us," Winona said, sliding from her horse. Her legs nearly buckled, but she caught herself on the stirrup leather. "They are coming to finish it," Iron Dog agreed. The preparations began immediately. There was no wailing, no panic. The tribe moved with the efficiency of a people who had known nothing but encroachment for a generation. Wagons groaned under the weight of hastily packed supplies. The winter teepees were struck. The heavy hides rolled tight. Elias watched as the mothers gathered the children. He saw a woman teaching a small boy, no older than 6, how to curl himself into the hollow of a riverbank root system, how to pull the brush over his head and remain as still as a stone, even if he heard screaming. The boy nodded, his eyes wide and dark, absorbing the lesson of survival. It broke Elias's heart in a way the war never had. In the war, soldiers fought soldiers. Here, the war was against existence itself. At dawn, the council was called, for the second time since Elias had stumbled into their lives. 321 warriors gathered in a wide half-circle. The sky was a bruised purple, the sun struggling to rise over the canyon walls. The air smelled of wet earth and gun oil. But this time, there was no wedding blanket. There was no talk of binding promises to save a life. The question on the table was total. Fight, flee into the high mountains where starvation waited, or attempt a negotiation that would likely end in chains. Chief Standing Elk stood in the center. He looked older than Elias had ever seen him. The escape from the fort had drained his reserves. He leaned heavily on a staff of ash wood. Elias stepped forward. He felt the eyes of the 321 men on him. They were not looking at a stranger anymore. They were looking at a man who had bled with them, but who was also of the blood that hunted them. "I will not lie to you," Elias said. His voice was raspy, carrying across the silent ranks. "Negotiation is death. Major Lynch cannot let us live. If we surrender, Vane will scatter you to the reservations in the south, where the fever waits. If we run to the mountains, the winter will finish what the soldiers started." Iron Dog stepped out of the line. "And if we fight," he challenged. "They have the Gatling guns. They have the cannons. We have rifles and courage. That is not enough against the numbers Vane has bought." "It is enough if we choose the ground," Elias said. He looked around the circle, meeting the gaze of men he had eaten with, worked with, and fought beside. "My crime was not desertion," Elias said, dropping the bomb he had carried in his chest for months. "The army calls me a deserter, but that is not my sin. My sin is that I was part of the machine. I rode with the columns that burned the crops in the south. I stood guard while the treaties were signed and then broken before the ink was dry. I was the sword in the hand of the liar." A ripple of tension went through the crowd. Hands tightened on knives. "I cannot undo that," Elias continued, his voice shaking slightly. "But I can offer you the only thing I have left. I know how Lynch thinks. I know how the militia moves. They are arrogant. They think you are a mob, not an army." He pulled the ledger page and the crate slat from his jacket. "I have the evidence that can hang them," he said. "But paper is slow. We need time. I offer you my life to buy that time. Put me in the front. Use me to draw them in. If I fall on your side of the line." Iron Dog stared at him. The resentment that had festered for months was still there, burning in the warrior's eyes. He took a step toward Elias, his hand resting on his tomahawk. Words. Iron Dog spat. A white man's words are like the wind. They change direction when the storm comes. Why should we trust the sword to fight the hand that forged it? He raised his voice. Turning to the warriors, he brings the lightning. And now he tells us how to dodge the thunder. I say we give him to Vane. Maybe the agent will take his prize and leave us be. It was a moment that teetered on the edge of violence. A few warriors murmured agreement. The fear was high, and a scapegoat was an easy comfort. Winona stepped between them. She did not shove Iron Dog this time. She stood like a statue, her presence radiating a cold, terrifying authority. He returned for me, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the murmuring like a knife. When the whiskey runners took me, he rode into the blizzard. When the soldiers took me, he walked into the lion's den. He has bled on the snow for this family. She turned to Iron Dog, her eyes blazing. You speak of custom. Iron Dog, custom says a man is judged by his deeds. This man has proven his loyalty not with promises, but with action. He is not a white man today. He is the husband of the chief's daughter, and he stands with us. The chief looked at Iron Dog. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then, slowly, Iron Dog took his hand off his weapon. He nodded. Once, a sharp, jerky motion. Then let him lead us to the dying place. Iron Dog growled. The council was interrupted by the sound of a horse galloping hard. A scout burst into the clearing, his pony foaming. He slid to the ground and ran to the chief. They burned the cache at Red Rock. The scout gasped. The winter corn, the dried meat, it is all ash. A collective groan went through the crowd. That cache was their insurance against the deep snows, and the scout continued, struggling for breath. The Miller family, the settlers who were friendly to us, they are gone. Their cabin is empty, and Vane. What a Vane? The chief demanded. The scout pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his belt. He nailed this to the burnt trees. The chief took the paper, but he could not read the scrawled English. He handed it to Winona. She read it, her face draining of color. He has signed the order, she whispered. He has declared the band hostile combatants. It authorizes the militia to take any measures necessary. It puts a bounty on scalps. Elias felt a cold pit open in his stomach. It was an extermination order. Then we have no choice, Elias said. We fight. He turned to the chief. We cannot fight them on the open plain. They have the range. We need to bring them close. We need a place where their numbers mean nothing. The chief looked at Elias. The Narrows? The Narrows. Elias nodded. The plan was set. The Narrows was a box canyon 5 miles north, where the river cut through a sheer wall of granite. The only way through was a shallow ford that forced riders to cross single file. They moved the women and children to the high caves above the canyon, camouflaged behind brush and stone. The warriors took their positions along the ridge lines and behind the boulders at the canyon floor. They waited. The day dragged on. The sun moved across the sky, indifferent to the violence preparing to unleash itself below. Elias lay behind a fallen log near the ford, his Henry rifle resting on the wood. Winona lay beside him. She had refused to go to the caves. She had a Winchester across her lap, her braids tied back, her face smeared with mud to cut the glare. You should be with your father, Elias whispered. My father is leading the center, she said, her eyes fixed on the bend in the river. My place is with my husband. Elias looked at her. In the harsh light, she was beautiful and terrifying. The girl he had woken up next to was gone. In her place was a warrior born of necessity. I love you, he said. It was the first time he had said it without fear attached to it. Winona looked at him. She reached out and squeezed his hand. Live to tell me that tomorrow. Elias, at dusk, they arrived. It started with the sound of jingling tack and the heavy rumble of wagons. Then, the column appeared around the bend. It was a motley force. At the front rode the militia, rough men in dusters, mercenaries paid in gold and whiskey. Behind them were the traders, Vane's personal enforcers, and scattered among them were blue uniforms, soldiers who had either been lied to or had lost their moral compass in the vastness of the territory. Vane was there. Elias saw him through the sights of his rifle. The agent was riding in a carriage near the rear, wrapped in a fur coat, looking like a king surveying his domain. They saw the empty canyon. They saw the river ford. "It's quiet," a militia captain shouted. "Too quiet. Push forward." Vane's voice drifted over the water. "Flush them out." The lead riders entered the water. The horses splashed through the icy current. Elias waited. He watched the lead rider reach the halfway point. He watched the second and the third. He waited until the river was full of men. "Now!" Elias screamed. He squeezed the trigger. The lead rider fell from his saddle. From the ridges above, 321 rifles opened fire at once. The sound was apocalyptic. The canyon walls magnified the report into a continuous, rolling thunder that shook the ground. The river erupted in splashes and screams. The militia, caught in the open water, panicked. Horses reared, throwing their riders into the freezing current. Men scrambled for the far bank, only to be met by Iron Dog and his flankers emerging from the rocks. It was not a battle. It was a meat grinder. The militia tried to retreat, but the wagons in the rear had jammed the narrow trail. Chaos consumed the column. Elias fired, worked the lever, and fired again. He did not aim for faces. He aimed for shapes. He was a machine again. But this time, the machine was fighting for something real. Winona was firing beside him. She was calm, methodical. She did not waste ammunition. "They are breaking," she shouted over the roar. "Look!" The rear of the column was turning. Vane's carriage was trying to wheel around, the driver whipping the horses in a frenzy. "He's running!" Elias yelled. "Vane is running!" The chief saw it too. From his position on the lower slope, Standing Elk rose. He signaled to a group of young warriors. They mounted their ponies, which had been hidden in a draw, and charged. The charge hit the rear of the retreating column like a hammer. The carriage was overturned. The firing began to sputter out as the militia scattered, running for the tree line, abandoning the fight. They were mercenaries. They were not willing to die for Vane's greed. Elias and Winona ran down the slope toward the overturned carriage. Smoke drifted across the battlefield, stinging their eyes. In the mud near the riverbank, the chief had cornered Vane. The agent was crawling on his hands and knees, clutching a satchel. Gold coins spilled from it into the bloody snow. He looked up, his face a mask of terror, mud plastering his expensive hair to his skull. Standing Elk stood over him. The chief held a war club, but he did not strike. He just looked at the man who had starved his grandchildren. "Please," Vane gibbered, holding up a hand. "I can pay you. I have money, government gold. Take it all. You stole the land," the chief said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "You stole the food, and now you try to buy your life with what you stole?" Vane's eyes darted to the side. "Look out!" Elias screamed. He saw the movement in the brush, a wounded militiaman, propped against a wheel, raising a pistol. Elias lunged, but he was too far away. The pistol cracked. Standing Elk jerked. A red bloom appeared on his chest, shattering the quillwork of his shirt. "No!" Winona screamed, a sound that tore her throat raw. The chief fell. Elias raised his rifle and shot the militiaman, but the damage was done. Vane scrambled to his feet, trying to run while everyone was frozen in horror. Iron Dog appeared out of the smoke. He did not use a gun. He swung his tomahawk. Vane collapsed. The silence of his end sudden and absolute. But Elias wasn't watching Vane. He was running to the chief. Winona was already there. She fell to her knees in the slush, pulling her father's head into her lap. "Father," she cried, pressing her hands against the wound. "Father, look at me." Standing Elk's eyes were open, staring up at the darkening sky. His breath bubbled in his chest. He looked at Winona. His hand, heavy and calloused, reached up to touch her face. "Winona," he whispered. The name was a sigh. He looked past her, at the smoke clearing from the valley, at the warriors gathering around in a silent, grieving circle. "Lead them," he rasped. "The path is hard." His hand dropped. The light faded from his eyes, leaving an unfinished future reflecting the gray clouds. Winona did not scream again. She did not collapse. She went devastatingly still. Elias stood behind her, his heart hammering against his ribs. He wanted to touch her, to comfort her, but the moment felt too sacred for his hands. Suddenly, a shout rang out. "Soldier!" Elias spun around. A single bluecoat, separated from the unit, had emerged from the river reeds. Disoriented and terrified, he saw the group, saw the dead agent, and raised his musket. He wasn't aiming, he was just reacting to the terror. The barrel was pointed straight at Winona's back. "Winona!" Elias shouted. He threw himself across the space between them. The musket roared. Elias felt a blow like a sledgehammer hit his shoulder. The world spun violently. He hit the ground, snow and ash filling his mouth. Pain, white and blinding, radiated from his upper chest. "Elias!" He heard her voice through the ringing in his ears. He tried to push himself up, but his arm wouldn't work. He rolled onto his back. Winona was hovering over him. Her hands, covered in her father's blood, were now pressing on his shoulder. Her face was a landscape of terror that she couldn't speak aloud. "Stay with me," she commanded, her voice breaking. "Do not dare leave me alone in this. Do not dare. I'm here." Elias wheezed. He looked down. The bullet had taken him high in the shoulder, missing the heart but shattering the clavicle. Blood was pulsing, dark and fast. The warrior Two Moons stepped up and dispatched the soldier, but the violence was over. The silence of the aftermath settled over the canyon. "We need fire," Winona yelled at the warriors, staring in shock. "We need the medicine bag. Move!" She was the leader now. Grief was a luxury she pushed into a box in her mind. She tore the hem of her dress, packing the wound. "You are a fool," she whispered to Elias, tears finally cutting tracks through the mud on her face. "A brave, stupid fool." "I told you," Elias gritted out, the pain making his vision tunnel. "I fall on your side of the line." The aftermath of the Battle of the Narrows was not a celebration. It was a grim accounting. They gathered the dead. 7 warriors, 12 militiamen, the agent Vane, and Chief Standing Elk. But the evidence Elias had carried, the ledger page, the crate slat, was not buried with the dead. As the survivors regrouped, a cavalry patrol appeared on the ridge. These were not Lynch's men. They were regulars from the southern garrison, drawn by the sound of the battle, led by a captain who had no love for the corruption of the agents. They rode down cautiously, white flags on their lances. They found a scene of carnage that could not be swept under the rug. They found the body of a government agent with stolen gold. They found the crates of whiskey stamped with government contract numbers. They found a tribe that had stood its ground not as savages, but as an organized force defending its home. Elias, pale and bandaged, sat propped against a wagon wheel. He handed the ledger page to the captain. "Read it," Elias rasped. "Read it and tell me who the criminal is." The captain read it. He looked at the branded crates. He looked at the dead militiamen who had no legal right to be there. He took off his hat. "I will take this to the general," the captain said quietly. "There will be an inquiry." Justice arrived, but it was imperfect. It was slow, and it was cold. In the weeks that followed, the news spread. The massacre at the Narrows became a headline, but the story shifted. With the evidence Elias provided, the narrative of the savage uprising crumbled. Vane was painted as a rogue agent. Major Lynch was relieved of command and faced a court of inquiry, forced to resign in disgrace to avoid prison. But the machine did not stop. The removal orders Vane had signed were not magically undone. The bureaucracy in Washington moved like a glacier, slow, crushing, and indifferent to the truth. The tribe was still ordered to move to the reservation come spring. The victory at the Narrows had bought them dignity, and it had bought them time, but it had not bought them their land. Winona stood on the edge of the canyon, looking down at the frozen river where her father had died. She wore the chief's blanket over her shoulders. The warriors watched her from a distance, waiting for her command. She was no longer just the translator. She was the voice. Elias limped up beside her. His arm was in a sling, his face gaunt from the blood loss and the fever that had followed. He leaned on a crutch he had fashioned from a rifle stock. "It's over," he said softly. "Is it?" she asked. She looked at the horizon, where the smoke from the battle still lingered in the air like a bruise. Lynch is gone. Vane is dead. But the paper still says we must go. We gained the winter. Elias said, we gained the spring. That is more than we had yesterday. Winona turned to him. She reached out and touched his bandaged shoulder, her fingers gentle. You could go. She said, the captain said the charges against you would be dropped if you testified. You are a free man, Elias. You could go back to the world of stone houses and warm fires. Elias looked at her. He saw the scar on her forehead from the whiskey runners. He saw the grief in her eyes that would never fully heal. He saw the woman who had saved his life, and the woman whose life he had saved. He looked over the burned edge of their world. He saw the tribe packing the wagons, preparing for the hard winter ahead. I am a free man, Elias said, and a free man chooses where he stands. He took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. I am not going anywhere. Winona, my fire is here. She looked at him, and for the first time since her father fell, a small, fragile hope sparked in her eyes. It was bruised, it was breathing hard, but it was alive. Then stand with me, she said. They stood together on the ridge, two scarred people facing a cold wind. They knew that love alone would not save them from the government, or the starvation, or the changing world. But as they turned back to the camp, walking shoulder to shoulder, they knew it was the reason they would keep fighting to live. The snow did not fall upon the plains. It settled like a heavy, suffocating shroud. The winter that followed the Battle of the Narrows was not a season of rest, but a season of relentless, grinding endurance. The band of Chief Standing Elk, now the band of Winona, moved south, pushed by the biting wind and the invisible, crushing pressure of government decrees that did not care about battles won or lost. The landscape was a blinding white sheet, broken only by the skeletal branches of cottonwoods and the dark, trudging line of the tribe. The silence of the plains was vast and indifferent. It swallowed the creaking of the wagon wheels, the snap of frozen leather, and the muffled sobs of mothers who had buried sons in the frozen mud of the canyon. Winona rode at the head of the column. She did not ride in the wagon, though her exhaustion was a physical weight that pulled at her bones. She rode her father's horse, a tall gray gelding that seemed to sense the absence of its master. She wore a heavy buffalo coat, the collar pulled up against the wind, but her face was exposed, raw and chapped. She had to be seen. The people needed to see her. They needed to see that the daughter of Standing Elk was not hiding from the cold that threatened to take them all. Elias Thorne rode beside her. He was a shadow of the man who had ridden into the fort. His left arm was bound tight against his chest in a sling made of blue wool, a piece of a captured soldier's coat. The bullet from the Narrows had shattered his collarbone and torn through muscle that was slow to knit in the freezing temperatures. Pain was his constant companion, a sharp, hot rhythm that spiked with every step the horse took. But shame was a heavier burden. He watched the people walking behind them. He saw Old Man Kickingbird, wrapping his feet in rags because his moccasins had worn through. He saw the children, their faces pinched and gray, huddling under thin blankets in the back of the wagons. They are hungry, Elias said, his voice rough from the dry air. We are all hungry, Winona answered. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the horizon, searching for landmarks in the whiteout. We should stop, Elias said. The horses are blowing. Kickingbird is stumbling. If we stop now, the frost will take their toes, Winona said, her tone clipped and final. We make the tree line at Bitter Creek. Then we stop. She was hard. She had to be. In the weeks since her father's death, Winona had learned that leadership was not about speeches or glory. It was about math. It was about calculating how many pounds of dried meat remained against how many mouths needed feeding. It was about deciding who rode in the wagons and who walked, knowing that the walkers burned more energy and weakened faster. That night, they camped in a stand of scrub pine. The fires were small, smokeless things fed by dried dung and twigs. Winona sat by their fire, reviewing the tally sticks. She looked older. The girl who had teased him about his pronunciation was gone, buried under layers of responsibility. Elias watched her. He wanted to reach out, to smooth the worry line between her brows, but he felt the distance of his own failure. "I should be hunting," he said, poking the fire with a stick. "A one-armed man can still track." "You are feverish." "Elias," she said without looking up, "you would freeze before you found a rabbit." "I am useless sitting here," he snapped. "I am another mouth to feed." Winona stopped. She put the tally sticks down and turned to him. The firelight caught the hollows of her cheeks. "Do not do that," she said quietly. "Do not vanish into self-hatred. It is a luxury we cannot afford. I led them into that canyon," Elias said. "And you led them out," she countered. "You gave us a chance. Do not insult the dead by regretting the fight." She moved closer to him, her movements stiff with cold. She reached out and adjusted his sling, her fingers brushing his neck. The touch was brief, but it grounded him. "My father is gone," she whispered, the veneer of the chief cracking for just a second. "I cannot replace him. I do not know the songs he knew. I do not know the old treaties." "You know the truth," Elias said, "and you know how to survive. That is what they need now. Not a song, a map." Winona leaned her forehead against his good shoulder. For a moment, she was just a daughter mourning a father, a woman terrified of the dark. "Help me, Elias," she breathed. "Help me keep them walking." "I will," he promised, until the wheels fall off. The journey brought them to the edge of the settlement lands again. They needed flour. They needed ammunition for hunting. They approached a small town called Iron Ridge. It was a cluster of buildings clinging to the side of a mining road. Winona ordered the warriors to stay back. She took Elias and 2 moons, driving a single wagon loaded with tanned hides, the only currency they had left. They stopped the wagon in front of the general store. The town was quiet, but eyes watched them from windows. A dog barked incessantly. The store owner came out onto the porch. He was a heavy man with a dirty apron and a shotgun leaned against the doorframe. He looked at the hides, then at Winona, then at Elias. "We don't want your trade," the man said, spitting tobacco juice into the snow. "We have good skins," Winona said, her voice steady. "Winter coats. We need flour." "I said we don't trade with hostiles," the man repeated. "We are not hostiles," Elias said, stepping down from the wagon. "We are travelers, and we have money if you don't want skins." He reached for the small pouch of coins Vane had dropped in the mud, which they had recovered. The store owner picked up the shotgun. "I know you," he said, narrowing his eyes at Elias. "You're the white renegade, the one who turned on his own kind." "I am a man trying to buy flour," Elias said, keeping his hand away from his pistol. "Get out," the man said, raising the barrel, "before I call the boys. We heard about the Narrows. We heard you killed good men." "They were mercenaries," Elias said, "and they attacked us. They were white men," the shopkeeper shouted. "And you sided with savages." A door opened across the street. A woman in a bonnet stepped out, holding a broom. "Get moving," she yelled shrilly. "We don't want your trouble here. Take your squaw and go back to the hills." Winona stiffened. Elias saw her hand tighten on the wagon rail until her knuckles turned white. She was trembling, not with fear, but with a rage so hot it could have melted the snow. She had been educated in their schools. She spoke their language better than they did, and they looked at her like she was a stray dog. "Winona," Elias said softly. "Don't." She looked at him. Her eyes were black flint. She took a deep breath, held it, and let it out slowly. She learned in that moment to hold her rage like a blade. She would not dull it on people who did not matter. She would save it for the throat of the beast. "Turn the wagon," she said to 2 moons. As they turned, a man walking down the boardwalk stopped. He wore a suit that was too nice for Iron Ridge. He looked at the wagon, then at Elias. "Wait," the man called out. The shopkeeper lowered his gun slightly. "What do you want?" "Mr. Hurst?" The man in the suit walked through the slush to the wagon. He looked at Elias's bandaged arm. "You are Thorne?" the man asked. "Who is asking?" Elias replied, "My name is Hurst," the man said. "I write for the Denver Tribune." Elias tensed. "A reporter. I'm not interested in stories." Elias said, "I'm not interested in stories either." Hurst said, "I'm interested in facts. I received a wire from the Capitol. It seems a certain Major Lynch has been relieved of command, and a certain trading company is under investigation for fraud." Winona looked down from the wagon seat. "What does this mean to us?" "It means," Hurst said, looking up at her with a strange expression, "respect, perhaps, or curiosity, that the narrative is changing. People in the East are reading about the Narrows. They are reading about the Ledger. You aren't just hostiles anymore. You are a question mark." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bag of tobacco. "I don't have flour," Hurst said, "but I have this. Keep going south. There is a magistrate in Silverton who is asking questions about Vane. He might listen to you." He tossed the tobacco to Elias. "Good luck, Thorne. You're going to need it." They drove out of Iron Ridge with empty wagons, but the mood had shifted. The wall of silence had a crack in it. That night, the intimacy between Elias and Winona shifted too. The frantic desperation of the chase was gone. The adrenaline that had fueled their initial passion had burned off, leaving something quieter, steadier. They lay under the buffalo robes in the small travel tent. The wind howled outside, but inside, it was warm. Winona traced the line of the scar on Elias's shoulder. The stitches had been removed, leaving a jagged pink line. "It is ugly," Elias murmured. "It is history," she corrected. She kissed the scar. Then she moved up to his jaw, her lips soft. There were no grand declarations, no promises that they would live forever. They knew better now. They knew the world was a machine that wanted to crush them. But in the small space of the blankets, they carved out a sanctuary. "Winona," Elias whispered, pulling her close with his good arm. She rested her head on his chest. "I am here." Their making love was slow, rooted in a profound, aching tenderness. It was a reclaiming of their bodies from the violence of the last month. When he touched her, it was with reverence. When she held him, it was with an anchoring strength. They stopped being symbols, the renegade and the chief's daughter, and became simply a man and a woman, huddled against the cold, choosing each other in the dark. But the daylight brought the weight back. The tribe was divided. As the hunger deepened, whispers began to circulate. Some of the elders blamed Winona for the continued hardship. They said she was too young, that her connection to the white man had cursed them. "She brings the bad luck," a woman muttered as Winona passed. "The spirits are angry because she sleeps with the enemy." Others, the younger warriors who had fought at the Narrows, looked at her with awe. They saw her as the reason they were still breathing. Winona heard the whispers. She did not argue. She absorbed them. It cost her sleep. It cost her the last remnants of her innocence. She walked with her head high, but her eyes were heavy. "Leadership is lonely," she told Elias one morning, watching the sun rise over a gray landscape. "You aren't alone," Elias said. "In this, I am." She said, "I have to be. If I show them doubt, they will break." They reached the crossroads near Silverton a week later. A courier rider was watering his horse at a trough. He was a young boy, barely 18, carrying a leather satchel stamped with the U.S. Mail logo. Elias saw him. He made a decision. He went to the wagon and found a piece of charcoal in the back of an old supply invoice. He sat on a rock and wrote. He wrote it all down. He named Major Lynch. He named the date of the Sand Creek Massacre. He detailed the illegal orders, the theft of the rations, the framing of the tribe. He signed it. Elias Thorne, formerly Sergeant, 3rd Cavalry, sworn before God in the open sky. He walked over to the courier. "Boy," Elias said. The boy jumped, reaching for a pistol he clearly didn't know how to use. "Easy," Elias said. "I have a letter. It needs to go to the territorial judge in Denver. I can't take private mail without postage," the boy stammered. Elias reached into his pocket. He took out the last gold coin from Vane's satchel. He pressed it into the boy's hand. "This covers the postage," Elias said, "and the risk." The boy looked at the coin, then at Elias's face. He recognized him. Everyone knew the description of the one-armed renegade now. "You're him," the boy whispered. "Take the letter," Elias said. "If you believe in justice, take it." The boy hesitated, then nodded. He shoved the paper into his satchel. "I'll get it there, mister." Elias watched him ride away. He had just signed a confession that could lead to his hanging if he was ever caught, but he felt lighter than he had in years. 2 weeks later, they reached the new place. It was not the lush valley of the Narrows. It was a high plateau, windswept and rocky. The game was scarce, jackrabbits and the occasional elk that had wandered too high. The water was deep in the earth, requiring hard digging. The people stopped. They looked at the desolate landscape. A murmur of despair went through the line. "This is it?" Iron Dog asked, looking at the barren ground. "This is where we live." Winona rode to the front. She turned her horse to face them. "This is where we stand," she said, her voice carrying over the wind. "The valley is gone, the fort is gone, but we are here. The ground is hard, but we are harder." She dismounted. She took a shovel from the wagon and walked to a patch of snow-covered earth. She drove the shovel in. "Dig," she ordered. It was a brutal start, but slowly, the camp took shape. They found a sheltered spot near a grove of stunted cottonwoods. They pitched the lodges. Elias worked despite his arm. He found fallen timber and began to notch logs. He wasn't building a temporary shelter. He was building a cabin. It was a rough frame, ugly and crooked, but it was permanent. It was a statement. Hope arrived in small things. A child laughed as a dog chased a snowshoe hare. A fire caught on the first try with damp wood. A dawn arrived that wasn't gray, but a brilliant, piercing blue. Spring came late, but it came. The snow melted into muddy streams. Green shoots pushed up through the rocky soil. Elias stood by the half-finished cabin. He was planting corn. It was a ridiculous act of optimism in this soil, but he did it anyway. Winona came up beside him. She was wearing a new dress of cured buckskin. She looked tired, but the shadows under her eyes were lighter. "The corn will struggle here," she said. "Then we will help it," Elias said, patting the dirt down. She looked at him. "You are a stubborn man, Elias Thorne. I have to be married to you." She smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached her eyes. The horizon was wide and open. The news from the south was mixed. The investigation into Lynch was proceeding, but the removal orders for the tribe had not been rescinded. They were technically squatters on their own land. The settlers in the towns still hated them. The newspapers still called them a problem. Justice had begun, but it was not complete. It might never be complete. But as the sun crested the mountains, painting the high desert in gold and crimson, Elias and Winona stood together. They were no longer the wounded drifter and the chief's daughter trapped in a political marriage. They were survivors. They were partners. There were no 321 warriors waiting for a wedding. There was only the vast, silent West, demanding endurance. Elias put his good arm around her shoulders. Winona leaned into him. "We have a lot of work to do," she said. "Yes," Elias said, looking at the corn shoots, then at the cabin, then at the woman he loved more than his own life. "We do." They watched the sun rise, choosing love not as an escape from the world, but as the fuel to keep living in it. Thank you for listening to He Woke Up Next to the Chief's Daughter. At dawn, 321 warriors waited for the wedding. This story of survival, justice, and love in the face of impossible odds has been a journey. I hope you found meaning in Elias and Winona's fight to endure. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from and what you thought of the ending. Did you think they made the right choice? If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to From Wild West for more tales of the American frontier. Share your thoughts in English, and thank you for being part of this adventure.